Hey everyone, and welcome back to Spooky Writes. My name's Kemal Onor, and on today's episode we're going to be talking about how can we write better characters. So, cue the intro and let's get into it. Okay, right. So I'm going to break characters down into three groups. First being the protagonist. Now, the protagonist is not always the hero of the story. More so, the protagonist is the character whom the main conflict of the story revolves around, because you can have stories that focus on traditional villain characters, and they can very much be the protagonist. But our definition of protagonist is going to be the character whom the conflict of the story revolves around. The main person that the story is centered on. Not necessarily the hero, not necessarily the Superman or the big, strong, muscular guy or woman who is the protagonist. It's whoever is central to the conflict that is occurring within the story. And then our second type of character is going to be our antagonist. Now, the antagonist is the character who is actively working against the protagonist. Typically, this is a villain character, but not always. Again, there are many examples of ways around this. There are many examples when this is not quite the case, depending on depending on the perspective of the story, and who's the protagonist can very much dictate who the antagonist is in the story. And maybe you retell a story told from a different perspective. Maybe you tell a story that's told from what was traditionally the villain character, and now the villain is seen as the protagonist, the character whom the reader, the audience is rooting for and is hoping will be able to achieve whatever goal he or she has within the story. So, protagonist is the main character, the character who is central to the conflict, the character who the majority of the conflict occurs to. Not necessarily the hero, not necessarily the good guys. So very much when I'm talking about characters, I very much want to stay away from that concept of good guy and bad guy, or good woman and good woman. I want to avoid those terms. So when we're speaking about characters within a literary sense, very much using the term protagonist for the character who the conflict revolves around, and the antagonist being the character who is actively seeking to thwart or stop or prevent the protagonist from achieving his or her goals. And then the third, I didn't forget, so the third character is going to be our side characters. Now, side characters are going to be supporting characters. They're going to be characters who might be in a scene. They might show up once. They might show up a number of times. They might be that character who is assisting the protagonist. And there are many stories that have multiple protagonists, as well as a large array of side characters. And so thinking about so now that we have the basic terminology down of protagonist being the character who is central to the story, the character who the conflict, the main arc of the story occurs to and revolves around, and we know that our antagonist is the character seeking to stop or prevent the protagonist from achieving his or her goals. Now we need to think about how can we make these characters more interesting? How can we write better characters that are not just 2D cutouts, right? So thinking about how can we write stronger protagonists? How can we write stronger antagonists? Because we don't want antagonists to be completely evil. We don't want our characters to be black and white. We want our characters to be somewhere on the spectrum. We want shades of gray, not the book, but shades of gray within our characters, because the fictional characters that we are writing about should reflect characters within the real world. And there is no one on this planet that I'm aware of that is 100% evil or is 100% good all the time. We make judgments and we make decisions on an everyday basis that can put us somewhere within that spectrum of being absolutely good or absolutely evil. And there is nothing in this world that is absolutely evil. Nothing is absolutely good. So we want our characters to be the same way, We want our characters to question their moral decisions. We want our characters to struggle with their decisions. And the main two things that there's to make stronger characters, we want our characters to have strengths, and we also want them to have weaknesses, right? We don't want characters that are completely strong, 100% always able to defeat anything that comes in their way. We want them to have weaknesses. So maybe think about pairing strengths and weaknesses. Think about a character that might be really strong but is incredibly shy and doesn't like being around people, or is very, very introverted but is incredibly strong. And so think about ways that you might be able to play with strengths and weaknesses. You might make someone who is incredibly smart when it comes to machines, but their weakness might be that they are unable to choose what they want to wear in the morning, and it takes them hours and hours because they're constantly questioning what they want to wear. So just think about fun ways that you can pair these and try and avoid cliches. We very much want to make characters that are fun, and we want to play around with characters, especially early on within your writing. And this channel is very much all about beginning writers, about writers who are looking for just the initial push to start writing, the initial push to tell yourself that you are capable of writing, that what you want to do is valid, and and how to get better at it. So thank you so much for watching. If you like this content, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and let me know if you want to see anything else, or let me know what else you want to see in the comments below. Thank you so much.